Alright, yeah. I think it's good now. So today we're gonna go over persistence in SnapKit. But before we go into that, let's discuss some important announcements for today. So the hack challenge stuff, we've decided we finalized a lot of the information already. So this Friday from 4:30 to 6:30, we don't know where it's at yet, but I'll create an announcement on Ed about the location. But there is going to be a team mixer. So this is where you can kind of meet other people from other courses and find people who you vibe with or something, so that you can form a group for the hack challenge. So then again, that is this Friday. Then the kickoff, or well, Friday night. I didn't put this on the announcements, but that night, Friday night, there will be this, I guess, optional matching forum. So if you do find teammates in the mixer and want to be partnered with them, then you will need to fill out that form. But if you do not fill out that form, then we will randomly pair you up based on like your interests and stuff. Okay. And then once after you fill out that form, the kickoff will start Monday. So the kickoff from the kickoff to Wednesday, you will find out your teammates. So on the day of the kickoff, you'll find out who your teammates are. It'll most likely be the people that you found with in the mixer. But we'll go over about more details about the hack challenge. So it's not just me and Richie, it will be other instructors as well. So that is going to be on Monday from 6:15 to, it's going to be like about an hour, so 6:15 to 7:15. Again, the location we really don't know where it's at yet, but I'll make an announcement about that. And then from that day until Wednesday, you will fill out this group roadmap form, which is basically kind of like a, I guess you're going to write what you plan on making your app, what your app is going to be about, as well as kind of breaking down the tasks that you're going to delegate to each team member. Okay, are there any questions about the hack challenge? All right, sounds good. Then again, A3 is due tomorrow night, so please finish that. And then, so this Wednesday, and then the lectures next week. So I guess after this lecture, you basically know everything, or you've learned everything that you need to know for all the assignments. So A4 will be collection views, but it will be like 2 collection views, so it's going to be a little bit different. There's only going to be 1 network request, which is just a basic GET request. But it's a little more, I guess, complex in the way that it's a lot different from the other assignments. But personally, I think A4 will be a lot easier than A3. Not only that, but up to the midpoint submission, the assignment or the points that you get is worth a lot more than just the entire assignment. So if you don't finish the assignment, then honestly it's okay. But yeah, so Wednesday we'll have a guest lecture on widgets. We'll have an ex-Aptiv iOS lead come in and present. He's also an engineer that works at Apple, so get hyped for that. And then the week after that, we're gonna have a lecture or 2 lectures on Swift UI. Have any of y'all heard about Swift UI before? Maybe? No? Some of y'all are shaking your head? Okay, yeah. So it's basically like a different way to kind of create your apps. Personally, I think it's a lot more fun, more intuitive. If you're familiar with like React, it's very similar to React. So yeah, get excited for that as well. Okay, are there any questions about course logistics? Sounds good. Okay, just to recap, this is kind of a recap of, I guess, lecture 6 as well. So we usually typically create a network manager class to store our network calls. And so when we create this class, it basically stores all of these Alamo file requests that you will be using in your app. And then when we want to use network requests, we always use this thing called, or we typically use this thing called a callback that allows us to be notified whenever that network request is done. And then to communicate between the front end and the back end, we use this language independence notation called JSON. And then the 2 requests, the 2 type of HTTP requests that we use in this course is a GET request and then a post request. So a GET request is used to retrieve data, and then a post request is typically used to send data to the backend. Are there any questions? Sounds good. Okay, so today's lecture will be about persistence. And so just to kind of introduce persistence, this time I didn't use ChatGPT. I actually made this quote myself. I did use Google for help though, but I still made it myself. Anyways, so basically persistence is the idea of, you store, or it's the storage of data on a disk without being altered by the user the next time the app is launched. So in our iOS world, it basically means that you're storing data locally inside the user's device. And so if you notice back in like A2, for example, if you were to change a text field and then, all that delegation stuff, but then if you were to like restart the app, everything would reset to, everything that you had before. Now, normally we usually have like a backend that where you kind of update that information. So whenever you launch the app again, the backend kind of, updates that new information for you. So we don't really care about, storing it locally. But then there are times when you do need to kind of store the data locally. So why persistence? Think about A2. Everything, all of the data that you are holding inside of the app right now, that's actually stored in RAM. So whenever you restart the app, all of that data gets deleted from memory. And so, we want to save the user's data on a local disk. For example, if you want to do light mode versus dark mode, in this demo, we'll be doing kind of like a bookmarking feature. Usually with bookmarks, most of the time we handle that on the front end side. And so like if you delete the app and then install it again, that local storage gets cleared. And so we usually typically, store bookmarks in the local storage. So there are different ways in iOS to kind of, use persistence. And so the one that we're going to use in this lecture is called user defaults. And so that's basically similar to a dictionary that you've used before. It basically stores key and value pairs. Now, it'll make a lot more sense when we go into the demo. But for now, we're going to be, that's just like the idea of user defaults. But then there are also other ways to kind of show persistence as well. You have file system, keychain, core data and Swift data, and then property lists. If you're interested in iOS development, then these things will be very, very important. Okay, so we're gonna get started with a demo about user defaults. So if you go inside of the, course textbook, there's like a clone link. There is one dependency that you will need to install, but it should already be installed for y'all. We decided to not use CocoaPods for this assignment, or for A4, because there were a lot of issues. So I think Swift Package Manager would be a lot easier to use. Okay, I'll give y'all a couple seconds to clone this repository. Okay, so the code is very similar to the collection view demo. The code is similar to the collection view demo, so it's just a 2-column collection view where you have this bird thing. The only difference is that you have this thing to this ability to kind of favorite and then store that favorite locally. So if I click on the cell, so you can see that it toggles the favorites. So if I turn this off, turn this on. Now, normally when you restart the app, everything will get reset. But now if my device wants to work. Okay. If I click on, I think it's lecture 8, this one. Yeah. You can see that everything gets saved. So these 2 birds that I favorited before, it gets saved. And so now that's our goal. So let's just start with how do we kind of use user defaults. So user defaults, like I mentioned earlier, is just basically storing key value pairs. So it's just like a dictionary. So now we need to figure out, okay, what will the key be and what will a value be? And what does the key really mean? It basically means that, okay, for example, in this, I guess, demo, we're going to use a key called favorites, meaning that if I want to check the storage for my favorite birds, I would access this key called favorites. Now, once I access that key called favorites, then it will give me some data. So it's kind of like I guess, an ID to know what kind of data you're kind of saving. So first, what I wanted to do was basically, so I wanted to be able to kind of click on the cell. And I know we didn't really demo this about how to kind of do something whenever you click on the cell, but this will be important in A4. And so we decided to kind of put that into this lecture. So the collection view inside of the delegates, so you create an extension, like collection view delegate. Can y'all see it back there? All right, perfect. Okay, so you create an extension of the view controller. Now notice that this extension is actually outside of the class. So a lot of students make this mistake, but make sure that the extension is outside of this class. So I create an extension of that class, and now I want to conform it to UI collection view delegates. Now sometimes this is you already did this and had like one function in here, but you might not. But if you don't, then just kind of create one. So there's a function called did select. Okay, I don't know why it doesn't want to autofill, but I guess I'll have to type it all. You know why it's not Yeah, okay. For some reason, I don't know why Xcode didn't want to autofill, but hopefully y'all's side autofills for y'all. Okay, so there's a function called did select item at that kind of allows you to do something whenever you click on that item. So what I want to do is get this bird object and kind of save it to this thing called user defaults. And so first you want to get the bird object, right? You want to get the bird object that is being selected. Okay, so now there's a parameter in here called index path that tells you where you're kind of selecting it. So I'm going to say let bird will be equal to birds at index path dot row. And now there's actually an array of birds here, and so that's how you kind of access that bird object inside of this array. Okay, so now what? Now I want to see if this user defaults contains the array for it, or contains that bird object. And so what I want to do is, second step, I want to fetch the favorited bird names from user defaults. Alright, so I'm going to fetch these bird names from the user default. And so I'm going to save it to some array called favorites. So favorites. So now the syntax to access from user defaults would be user defaults dot standard. And now there are like a bunch of options here, right? You can store a string to user defaults. You can store some data, an integer. But in this case, we want to store an array of bird names that we favorited. So I'm going to use .array. So now I'm going to give it some kind of key. It will be some, I guess, identifier to know which kind of, like what is this user default storing, right? It's storing favorites, for example. So I'm going to say the key for it will be favorites. Now this thing returns an array. So if I guess type favorites here, so it gives you an any object here. But then I don't want that to be an any object. I want to cast it to some type. So remember we cast by using the as keyword. And now this is storing an array of names. And so the name of the bird is a string. So I do as string. So I'm casting it to an array of string now. So if I look at the type, it's now an array of strings. Okay. Okay, so now what? Now you kind of want to be able to toggle the favorites. So the third step will be to toggle the favorites. So how do we know if something is favorited? Like, how do we kind of implement this idea of toggling? Well, what we want to do is see if that bird is already favorited. Now, if the bird is already favorited, then if I click on this item, it's going to toggle it off. So it's going to remove it from our favorites. On the other hand, if it's not already there, then you're going to add it to user defaults. So that's kind of like the logic that we want to do here. Okay, so now remember, favorites is an array. So what I'm going to do is use this favorites.contains method that tells you whether or not something is in it. Now this is an array of strings, so I can pass in the array, the bird name that I want. So bird.name. So if the favorites contains the bird name, then that means what? Name is already stored, right? Then you want to remove it. All right, name is already stored. Now I want to remove it from user defaults. So how do I remove it? Well, the array method has this, or the array object has a method called remove all. And then, so now, what this name in means is, okay, we have to unwrap this optional. So I'm going to give it a default value of this. Okay, so now what does this name in mean, right? It just means that this name corresponds to every element inside of the array. Now, because this is an array of names, it makes sense to use name in. Now, in A4, you won't be using names to kind of store inside of this array. Does anyone have any idea why we don't want to use, it's not a good idea to use names to store inside of the user defaults? Yeah, so like the reason is because the name is not really unique, right? Like imagine if Alden, there's another Alden. You want to kind of see, or you want each thing to be unique. So what we usually do is, like in A3, you had an ID, and the ID is unique. So in A4, you'll be dealing with IDs instead of the name. Okay, so now I want to remove the name from my favorites. So I'm removing all instances inside of favorites in which the name of the bird is equal to the bird name, bird.name. So basically what this thing does is saying, okay, this favorites array, remove all instances in which the elements is equal to the bird's name. So the bird that I clicked on. Okay, now what? Well, that's handling the case in which it was already there. So I toggle it off. But now I want to toggle it on, meaning that the favorites did not contain the bird yet. So what I'm going to do is say, okay, well, favorites, it's an array, right? So I can just simply just append the bird name to it. All right, before I move on, are there any questions? Yes.
Why don't you have to return name equals bird.name?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. So in Swift, if you're only having one line of code, then you can actually just omit this return. But this does the same exact thing. If I had multiple lines in here, then you want to use return.
It's sort of like Swift's version of like syntactic sugar, where if
Yeah.
you only have one line within two brackets, it just returns that line. It just knows to return it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, are there any other questions? All right, good. Okay, I'll just write a comment to make it more clear. Name not stored. Okay, you want okay. So now what? Now we updated this favorites array, but the problem is that this favorites array is actually locally stored in RAM. We want to kind of store it inside of the local data of the user's device. So what you want to do is say, okay, well, user defaults dot standard, and there's a function called dot set value. Now the value that you want to pass in can be any type. So what I'm going to do is pass in this new array that I created, favorites. Now where's this array going to be stored? Well, earlier I accessed it from this array called favorites, or from this key called favorites. Now I want to put it back into this key called favorites. That's what I'm going to do there. So basically what this does is that it updates user defaults. Okay. So now that I update user defaults, the last thing you want to do is kind of update the collection view, right? So I update user defaults. Now I want to update the collection view. So to do that, it's just simply collection view dot reload data. Okay, so let me just give that a run and see what happens. So I'm clicking on it, but it seems like the stars aren't being toggled. Okay, so let me try to restart the app and see if it's actually still working. Okay, so it seems like it's not working at all. That's because I'm missing one thing. The one thing I'm missing is that I want the cells to actually, I want the star icon to change depending on whether or not it's in the user defaults. So if you go inside of the cell, bird collection view cell, there's a to-do comment right here, right? Filled or unfilled. So whenever you want to configure the cell, you need to see whether or not it is in user defaults. So if it is in it, then you want to use the star.fill. Otherwise, you don't want to have it filled at all. So similar to what we did before, you can use user defaults dot standard dots. I'm gonna filter it out first, so I can say the favorites will be equal to user defaults dot standard dot array for the key. Now the key that I created earlier was called favorites. Now it's really important that you make sure that the key that you put in here aligns with the key that you used before. Right? They're all accessing the same place in memory. Okay, and now remember you want to cast it to your custom type or whatever type it is. In this case, it's an array of strings. And so now give it a default of an empty array. So now favorites, basically what happened here is that it just accessed it from local storage. So now you want to see if favorites dot contains the name of the bird. So it will be bird dot name. So if it contains the bird's name, then that means that you have it favorited. And so now you want to change the icon image to be filled. Otherwise, it won't be filled. I'll write some comments here. So stored in favorites, not stored in favorites. Okay. So I'm going to give that a run and see if that works. So as you can see, if I click on it, it like toggles it on and off. Now if I restart the app, you can see that all of that gets saved. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, there's actually one thing that I've noticed when I was helping students with A3. So a lot of this stuff, you want to do it inside of this configure method. You don't want to do it inside of the setup views method or like all these methods that you set it up. The reason is because of how a collection view dequeues the cells. So whenever you're actually like, why do we need to dequeue? That's because you don't want to waste too much memory. So what really happens behind the scenes is that Swift actually only allocates that many cells at once. So if you go inside of here, right, there's like 8 cells on the screen. So what Swift does is that it only initializes 8 collection view cell objects inside for this collection view. But if you were to have more, then what it's really doing is that it's not creating a new object every time. It's just simply calling this configure method. So if you were to do it inside of a setup function, then the issue would be that all of these cells might share this kind of information. So for example, if this thing was favorited, or if this star icon was blue, if I were to dequeue it, some of these might actually be blue as well. That's because it's reusing the same cell. And so you want to do that in a configure method to make it more unique to that one cell. Does that make sense? All right. Yeah, so just to quickly recap. So to store data, you want to use user defaults and then set value, and you can pass in whatever type to it and then give it some kind of key. So for example, if I want to store my name Vin inside of a key called name, I can just use that syntax. Now to access it, it's a lot different, right? If you want to access a string, you want to use .string. And then in our example, we use .array for accessing an array. Now that's stored, or you want to pass in the key that you used. Okay. This right here is actually wrong. I need to update that. But this should say a name right here. Right, that should say name right here. Alright, so now we're going to introduce this thing called SnapKit. So Richie's going to discuss that.
Okay, so this one you guys might enjoy very much. So just for like a quick raise of hands, who really dislikes using NS layout for constraints here? Okay, yeah, that's a lot of people, and I agree with you guys on that. I absolutely despise using NS layout. It is probably really gross. The syntax is really heavy, and it leads to this really messy code. So here today, we're going to introduce to you one of the CocoaPods or packages that you can install called SnapKit, and that really just simplifies all constraints for you, so that you don't make your code as cluttery. You don't need to set everything like NS like auto translate masking restraints. You don't have to set that to false anymore. And you don't also have to have a million constraints listed back to back that you don't even know how to read anymore. So this is where SnapKit comes in. So yeah, typically with NS layout, you tend to realize that you have one activate function or multiple activate functions that have multiple lists of constraints that you're defining. And it's sort of really hard to go back and debug and see which constraints are correct and which ones are wrong. So SnapKit is essentially a wrapper library that makes setting these constraints with auto layout very simple. So essentially it does the same thing, but it does a lot of the hard work for you. So we're not really setting constraints any differently. However, by using SnapKit, we allow the package to do sort of the heavy lifting for us. Okay, so we're going to jump right into the demo. So if you guys want to, I guess you can check out this branch. I believe if we go here, where's the where's the lecture notes thing for the checkout stuff?
Oh, it's
yeah. So you guys can check out 2-snapkit, and that'll get you the code that Vin just wrote. And
actually no, that's the final code.
Oh yeah, sorry. 1.user defaults. That's what you want to start off with. So that's what we're going to do here. So let's start off with the collection view. So keep in mind, when you guys created this view way back when, we sort of set the collection view equal to the constraints of the view here. So if we go back here, you can see that we added the collection view to the overall view. We translated auto masking into constraints to false, and then we added each of these constraints like this. So this is really gross just to constrain the bounds of the collection view to the bounds of your actual view. So what we want to do here is sort of just get rid of all that, comment it out because it's really gross, and then what we want to do now is actually constrain our collection view using SnapKit. So first we want to do is import SnapKit. So right above there, make sure you guys import that before we're able to use it. And so what we want to do is we want to constrain our collection view. So we do collection view dot snp, which stands for snap, dot make constraints. And you'll see there that we sort of have a closure here. You might be familiar with this with networking. What you can actually do here is directly just click enter. And you'll see that it sort of configures everything for you to where it makes whatever you're defining here make. So in this case, make represents the collection view itself. So what we're actually trying to do is constrain the collection view. So if you remember from up here, we sort of need to set the leading anchor equal to the leading anchor, the trailing anchor to the trailing anchor, and so on. But in this case, since we know what the super view is, and SnapKit sort of has access to that, we can just do this in actually one line. So we can do make dot edges dot equal to super view. And that does exactly the same thing as everything above here. So yeah, so this basically does the exact same thing as setting the leading, the trailing, top, the bottom to the super view. But keep in mind that we can only do this if we want to set the constraints to the exact same thing. So in this case, we're setting the collection view's leading anchor to the leading anchor of the view. Same thing with the trailing anchor, we're only setting it to the trailing anchor of the view. We're not using any constants in this case, and we're actually just directly copying the constraints of the super view to the actual collection view itself. So in this case, we're actually just able to convert whatever code we have up here into just this one line of SnapKit code. Okay, let's try another one. Let's see. I believe this would be in bird collection view cell. If you guys remember, we sort of had to constrain the label of the name as well as the bird image. So you see here we have more NSLayout code with translates to false as well as the NSLayout activate. So what we want to do is again comment all this out and start again. So what we want to constrain in this case is the bird image view. So we do bird image, and then we want to use SnapKit, so we need to use SNP, and then we want to make constraints. And you can just click enter and click enter again. And again, to reiterate, make represents whatever view you're trying to constrain here. So if you see here, we actually want to set the center X and the center Y equal to the content view. And keep in mind, we know here, because we added the bird image view to the content view, we know that the content view is the bird image view's super view. So again, rather than setting the X anchor to the X anchor and the Y anchor to the Y anchor, SnapKit has something useful just called center. So we can take make.center equal to super view. And boom, that's the same thing as setting these two constraints right here. And then we also have the height anchor and the width anchor that we want to set to a constant. So in this case, we have something for that as well. So we can do make.size. Since the height and the width, we want it to be the same, we could directly actually just set the size dot equal to, and then we can set the constant 128. So that will do exactly the same thing that the width, setting the width anchor and height anchor do. And like in case you actually do want to set the make anchor, the height and the width anchor separately, there's also something for that as well. So we have, as you can see, height as well, and then we have width as well. So in the case where it's essentially a square, you actually want to use size, so you limit the amount of code you write. But if you want to sort of limit, if you want to sort of like set like a rectangle or something like that, you would actually just need to set the width and the height independently. But again, you can see it's a lot less cluttery than whatever we have here. It's literally just 2 lines of code within the brackets here, as compared to this mess we have up here. So again, up here we have the label, right? So we're constraining the label to the content view center anchor, and we're constraining the top anchor to the bottom anchor of the bird image view. So here things get a little more complex, still not as complex as whatever NSLayout does. So in this case, okay, what do we start off with? Does anyone know? Show of hands, anyone? What are we trying to constrain here? Yep, exactly. So what we're starting off with is bird name label, because this is what we're trying to constrain. And then we want to say SNP for SnapKit, and then we want to make constraints. And again, you see here, we want to make the center anchor equal to the content view, which is the super view. So you can then make.centerx equal to super view. A lot quicker, as you can see. And however, for the top anchor, we actually want to constrain it to the bottom of the bird image. So this requires a little bit more. But again, it's pretty simple. So make.top, we want to constrain the top anchor to the bottom of the bird image view. Top equal to. And then rather than doing the super view this time, we actually want to constrain it to the bird image's bottom anchor. So we can actually do bird image dot snap. So make sure to use snap in this case, because otherwise SnapKit doesn't recognize that you're trying to use it. So you won't actually have access to whatever constraints that you're trying to set. So you want to constrain the top of the bird name label to the bottom of the bird image. And that's about it. But in this case, we actually want to set a constant as well, if you see here. And that's where sort of inset and offset come in. So in this case, since we're trying to constrain the top anchor to a bottom anchor, we actually want to use an offset, and then that would be 4. So that's the same thing as setting the constant over here, but except we're sort of using an offset in addition to setting the constraint to sort of offset that constraint by that amount. Let's say you were setting like a leading anchor to a leading anchor. That's the case where you would use an inset. So sort of it's the same thing as using a negative constant. So an offset you can think of as a negative constant, and as an inset you can think of as a positive constant. So yeah, this might be like confusing to memorize, but in the case where your constraints just don't work out, just switch inset to offset and it'll work regardless. Okay, and I guess last but not least, we also have the star icon here as well that we want to replace the constraints of. So just to do one last thing, we can do star icon dot snap dot make constraints. So you see here we want to make the top anchor equal to the content view's top anchor. And again, the content view is the super view. So you can do make dot top dot equal to super view. And then that constrains it to the top of the content view. And then we also want to make the trailing anchor equal to the content view's trailing anchor as well. So again, you can do make dot trailing dot equal to super view. So you can actually see here, we're actually almost repeating these 2 lines of code. So SnapKit goes a little bit further, and if you also want to constrain 2 of the exact same things, you can actually trail them back to back. So rather than do make.top and make.trailing, you can do make.top.trailing dot equal to, and this does the exact same thing as what we did before, except it keeps it into one line and keeps everything clean. So, as you can see here as well, we also want to set the width and the height anchor again. Since we're doing it to the same thing as 24, we can just directly set the size dot equal to 24, and it's exactly the same as setting the width anchor and the height anchor as above here. Okay, so if you guys aren't convinced that this will work, we can try running our code again. Hopefully I did everything right. The conversions hopefully should translate. But even though we commented out all the code from NSLayout, you can see that everything is working perfectly, even though we commented out all that NSLayout. So you can sort of see how powerful SnapKit is. It really sort of cleans up your code a lot. As you can see here, it sort of converts whatever like mess we have here, sort of like a clean, organized version of the NSLayout in form of like one like contained code chunk, as you can see here. So yeah, there's not really too much into this demo. That's just sort of the gist of SnapKit. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, yeah, so I guess like show of hands now, who wants to use SnapKit instead of NSLayout? Okay, yeah, there we go, that makes sense.
Yeah, no, y'all should use Swift UI instead. If you think SnapKit is like really easy, Swift UI is actually like 10 times a lot quicker. Yeah,
Nah.
go to next week's lecture. It's a lot better. Okay, we're gonna go into the Kahoots. Ignore the answers. Oh, what's up? Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. I guess, do you want to wait till after class? Make sure you get the thing. Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
Oh yeah, by the way, A4, I've installed SnapKit for y'all, so you can use SnapKit if you want to. First question: when is the hack challenge mixer? Nice. So great job to most of y'all. So yeah, the hack challenge mixer is this Friday. So you'll be able to find people that you want to work with for the hack challenge. We don't know where exactly it's going to be, but I'll make an announcement for that tomorrow.
Question?
Like, how do we know like how many people that have limits?
I
like-
feel like we haven't really confirmed numbers with backend yet. We feel like usually it'll be 1-to-1 or 2-to-1. I think this semester it's pretty balanced, so you should expect like one other backend member maybe paired with an iOS too.
Yeah.
So you're not going to be paired with Android. So how it really works is you're going to be paired as a front-end group to a backend member and maybe even a designer. You might not get a designer, but usually the ratio is 1-to-1 to backend to frontend.
Yeah, I was looking at the course, like the numbers for the backend course as well as the iOS course. There's actually a lot more students in the iOS course this semester than like in the past. So you can expect to have maybe the teams are gonna be like from 4 to 5, but we're gonna have like at least 2 to 3 front end members and 2 to 3 back end members. But it depends on like the people that you meet at the mixer. If you vibe with more front end developers, then you're gonna be paired with more front end.
So the CAC challenge kickoff is next Monday. True or false? Okay, good. You guys remember. Make sure if you haven't already, make sure you put it in your GCal. That is a very important event that you should attend. Otherwise, you'll be pretty lost when you're starting your hack challenge project. Also, make sure to attend the mixer if you don't have any group members. So make sure you add that to your GCal.
Yeah, we also have a hack challenge GCal. I'll send that out in the announcement tomorrow. Nice. All right, last question. Are you excited for widgets in Swift UI?
Damn.
Nice. Okay.
The 5 of you who aren't though.
Yeah. So Wednesday again, we'll have an engineer from Apple give us a lecture about widgets. So if you're interested in working for Apple or something, then you can talk to him about his experience there. All right, good job. Yeah, just some quick to-dos. Again, A3 is due tomorrow night. We'll also release A4 tomorrow. The partners will be the same as A3, unless your partner ditched you or you don't want to work with your partner anymore, then just email me. The mixer is Friday, and then the kickoff is Monday, and then fill out the roadmap by, okay, this is wrong. This should say Wednesday, November 15th. Okay, y'all are free to leave.
Just